What's up, Charlie? Now you know we cannot talk about African history without talking about civilization and where it all started. So today, we're talking about civilization of ancient Egypt, and this is just part one of a few more parts to come on this topic. Let's get right into the video. Civilization is simply the advancement of people's cultures, which includes writing, governance, law, just to name a few. The Egyptian civilization, which is under Pharaoh's rule, was in every respect indigenous African civilization. It also began with the adoption of agriculture as a way of life. From about 4400 BC, there were two main features of ancient Egyptian life. The first one was the establishment of village communities, and then the second was the domestication of plants and animals for food. By 3400 BC, small farming communities had developed in the Nile Valley. Wheat and barley were cultivated and livestock were reared in Fayum, Merinde, Badari, and Nagada. Simple pottery wares were made by the people of the Nile Valley, and they were used for cooking and storage. Now let's talk more about governance. Egypt is one of the first societies in the ancient world to establish a centralized monarchical state. They first developed into two kingdoms, which were called the Lower Egypt and the Upper Egypt. Lower Egypt was established in the Delta area where their king wore a red crown, while in the Upper Egypt, their king wore a white crown. Around 3100 BC, the pharaoh of the Upper Egypt, whose name was Pharaoh Menes, also known as Pharaoh Name, inaugurated the first dynasty of a united Egypt by conquering the Delta area. In the government of Egypt, the pharaoh was known as the chief executive, as well as the head of state. He was seen as both the priest and the king by the Egyptian people. He was also considered as a god whose personal name was too sacred to mention, which is why he is called Pharaoh. Pharaoh simply means the royal house or the royal family. Pharaoh was not only the political head, he was also the chief judge and commander-in-chief of the army. He was also the supreme landlord who received rent from tenant farmers. Egyptians believed Pharaoh was the link between the spiritual world and his subjects, and that the pharaohs were never judged like ordinary men after death. Instead, the Egyptians believed that they went straight to heaven, sailing across the sky in the sun driven by golden oars. Now, in order to enhance unity between Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, Pharaoh Name built a capital city called Memphis. To complete the transformation of the two lands into a centralized state, Pharaoh Name combined the two symbols of the red and the white lands, which were the cobra and the papyrus of the north, the vulture and the lotus of the south. He also wore a double crown, which was the crown of the Upper Egypt and the crown of the Lower Egypt, worn together to show his rule over both lands. Pharaoh also adopted and promoted the customs and gods of the two Egypts. He took possessions of the harems of both the Upper and Lower Egypt, maintaining the two palaces, granaries, and tombs of the two lands. And finally, he also maintained the symbols of independence of both regions. This went on for about 30 centuries, with the kings of ancient Egypt calling themselves the lords of two lands. The next in command on the political ladder was the vizier. He was the prime minister and in charge of non-spiritual matters of the kingdom. He carried policies from the pharaoh to governors of the different provinces. There were also scribes in Pharaoh's government. They were military scribes and civilian scribes who spent years receiving training in the art of government to qualify them as skillful administrators before they took on their position, and their sole responsibility was to keep accounts and copy documents. In order to ease the task of administration and facilitate development, the pharaoh divided the land of Egypt into 42 administrative provinces. The provinces were placed under governors who reported to Pharaoh, but were under the supervision of the vizier. The main duties of the governors were mainly to ensure the digging of canals and to collect taxes. They were also responsible for the security of their respective provinces. The survival of a great kingdom such as Egypt was dependent on its military strength and internal security for peace and order, as well as security on the borders to ward off potential external threats with powerful military and official leadership. Egyptian supremacy lasted until about 1200 BC. Centuries of warfare sapped Egyptian strength when invaded armies from Libya in the west, Assyria, Babylon, and Persia in the east. In 322 BC, Alexander the Great of Greece defeated the Persian forces occupying Egypt and colonizing the land. After Alexander's death, one of his trusted generals named Ptolemy seized the Egyptian throne and founded a dynasty in Egypt which lasted for almost 300 years. In 30 BC, Egypt became a subject of the Roman Empire that was spreading through the Mediterranean countries around that time. In AD 642, the Arabs conquered the country from the Romans between 1249 and 1517. The country was ruled by the Mamelukes, who were ex-slave soldiers of the Arab overlords in Egypt. Even though the Ottoman Sultan of Turkey conquered Egypt from the Mamelukes in 1517, he continued to rule the land through the Mamelukes until that regime was swept away in 1798 by Napoleon Bonaparte of France. Well, we have come to the end of part 1 of the civilization of ancient Egypt. Thank you very much for watching. Please like and share this video, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Peace, Charlie.